I still remember the smell of the station air that morning, recycled and faintly metallic, the same as every other morning I had spent among humans. I am Vesa Thal, and I was a young officer then, serving with the Concorde fleet on a joint outpost called Haven Ridge. I want to tell you what happened there, because I was one of the last of my generation to see it with my own eyes. After that day, everything changed. Every species in the Concorde tells this story now, in one form or another, but I lived it, and I want you to hear it the way I remember it, not the way the records describe it. Before I go further, you must understand what we believed about humans back then. Earth was marked on every star chart as a death world, a planet so harsh that anything born there was assumed to be built for survival above all else. High gravity, unstable weather, predators in the oceans, in the forests, even in the soil. And yet, when humans joined the Concorde, they did not act like survivors of such a place. They were polite. They followed procedure. They apologized when they bumped into you in a hallway. They filled out forms without complaint. They smiled more than any species I had met, and they rarely raised their voices. We assumed this was simply who they were, gentle by nature, despite their world. Some of us even felt a quiet pride in having tamed them, in having welcomed such a wild species into a peaceful galactic community. I did not know then how wrong that assumption was. I did not know that gentleness, for humans, was a choice they made every single day, not a limit they were born with. I worked closely with a human officer named Daniel Reyes. We were the same rank, assigned to the same research and defense wing, and over 2 years we had become close friends. He taught me human card games. I taught him how to pronounce words in my language without insulting anyone's ancestors by accident. He was calm, patient, and endlessly curious about my people's customs. If you had asked me then to describe the most dangerous person on that station, I would not have picked him. I would not have picked any human. Haven Ridge was a joint science and defense outpost near a contested border region, shared between 3 Concorde species and a small human contingent. It was not a large station, but it was important because it monitored a corridor where several hostile factions had been probing Concorde territory for years. One of these factions was a raider group called the Korath Fleet, opportunists who struck weak or poorly defended outposts and vanished before real support could arrive. They had studied the Concorde's response patterns carefully. They knew that most Concorde forces preferred negotiation, containment, and calculated retreat over direct confrontation. They believed humans followed the same doctrine, since that was all anyone had ever seen from them. The attack came without warning, early in the station's 3rd rotation cycle. Korath ships dropped out of hidden approach vectors and struck the outer defense ring before our sensors even confirmed contact. I remember the first alarm, a long single tone that meant hull breach. I remember running toward my post through corridors that were suddenly full of dust and flickering light. I remember calling for Daniel over comms and getting only static. The raiders were not interested in a quick smash and grab this time. They wanted to send a message to the Concorde, a message that said no outpost was safe, not even ones with human defenders. They targeted the residential and research sections first, where families lived, where children attended lessons, where scientists from a dozen species worked side by side. Several colonists did not survive those first minutes, including 2 of my own crewmates, people I had shared meals with only the day before. I will not describe the details of what happened in those early corridors. I do not think it is necessary, and I do not think it would help you understand the story better. What I want you to understand is what happened afterward, once the human response teams arrived at the command center. I was there when Daniel walked in. He was not running. He was not shouting orders. He moved with a stillness I had never seen in him before, a quiet focus that made the hair on my arms rise, though I did not yet understand why. The other human officers around him wore the same expression, calm on the surface, but with something underneath that I can only describe as deathly patience. It was as if a switch had been thrown somewhere inside them, turning off everything except the task in front of them. I asked him what our response plan was. I expected him to say we would hold position, wait for Concorde reinforcements, and attempt to negotiate a ceasefire corridor for the wounded, the way every other defense doctrine I had studied recommended. Instead, he looked at the damage report, looked at the casualty list, and said something I have never forgotten. "You've only ever seen us hold back." I did not understand what he meant in that moment. I understand it now. Within minutes, the human contingent had reorganized the entire station's defense in a way that broke almost every Concord tactical guideline I had been trained to follow. They abandoned the standard containment perimeter and instead spread their forces into small, independent teams, each one making its own decisions without waiting for central approval. My own commanders would have called this reckless. Concord doctrine valued centralized control above almost everything else, because it minimized unpredictable losses. Humans, it turned out, were willing to accept unpredictability if it meant reacting faster than their enemy could plan for. I stayed close to Daniel's team, partly out of duty, and partly because I did not want to be anywhere else. I watched him and 3 other humans move through damaged sections of the station with a kind of controlled urgency that seemed impossible to sustain, yet they sustained it for hours. They used the station's own damaged infrastructure against the raiders, rerouting power systems, sealing sections at precisely timed intervals, turning the wreckage of their own home into a maze that worked against the attackers instead of against the defenders. What struck me most was not their speed or their coordination. It was their refusal to stop. Every other species I had served with, including my own, had a threshold, a point where losses became too costly, where retreat became the wiser option, where the mission was reconsidered in favor of survival. Humans did not seem to have that threshold, or if they did, it was far beyond anything I had imagined. They kept moving forward, methodically, patiently, absorbing setbacks that would have broken the morale of any other unit I had served with, and simply adjusting their approach without ever losing that unsettling calm. At one point, our sensors detected that the Korath forces were attempting to pull back, having lost more of their advantage than they expected. In standard Concord doctrine, this would have been treated as success. Contain the threat, let it retreat, avoid further losses on both sides. I remember relaying this information to Daniel, expecting him to order a stand down. He shook his head. Not yet. If we let them retreat now, they'll remember us as an easy target that got lucky. We need them to remember us as something they never want to test again. I want to be clear, because this is the part of the story that people often misunderstand when they retell it. The human response that day was not about causing harm for its own sake. It was about ensuring, with total certainty, that the threat to their people would not simply return next month, or next year, wearing a different name. Every decision I watched them make was aimed at protecting the colonists, the researchers, the families still sheltering in the station's deeper levels. Their calm was not coldness. It was focus, sharpened by the knowledge of exactly what they were protecting. By the time Concord reinforcements arrived, hours after the initial attack, the situation on Haven Ridge had already been resolved. The Korath fleet had been decisively driven off, their approach corridor mapped and reported to Concord Command so that no other outpost could be surprised the same way again. The human contingent had lost people that day too. I remember Daniel standing quietly beside a row of recovery pods, his calm finally cracking, as he said a name I did not recognize, a young human researcher who had not survived the initial breach. In that moment, he did not look like the person who had walked into the command center hours earlier. He looked exhausted and sad and very human. I asked him, once things had settled, how he and the others had managed to stay so composed through it all. He rubbed his face and gave me a tired half-smile. We weren't composed, Vesa. We were just doing the job in front of us. One step. That's all it ever is. I did not fully believe him at the time. I believe him more now, though I still think there was more to it than that. I think humans carry something with them that most other Concord species do not. An old instinct from a harder world, one that only surfaces when it is truly needed. For most of their history among us, they had never needed it. They had been allowed to simply be gentle, curious, cooperative members of a peaceful community. Haven Ridge was the first time that instinct had been called upon, and it answered without hesitation. In the days that followed, Concord analysts reviewed everything that had happened at Haven Ridge. I was interviewed twice, asked to describe exactly what I had seen, exactly how the human teams had operated, exactly what made their response so different from anything predicted in existing threat models. I remember one analyst asking me, almost nervously, whether I believed humans had been holding back their true capabilities the entire time they had been Concord members. I told her the truth. I did not think it was deliberate deception. I think humans had simply never needed to show us that side of themselves before. And once the need passed, they folded it away again, as easily as putting away a tool after a job was finished. That, more than anything else, is what unsettled the wider Concord. Within a week of the attack, the human contingent on Haven Ridge had returned almost entirely to their familiar selves. Daniel apologized to me for missing our usual card game the night of the attack, as if that were somehow the most important thing to address. The human research teams resumed their work with the same patient curiosity as always. The polite formality returned. The careful procedures returned. It was as though nothing extraordinary had happened at all, except for the empty seats at certain tables, and the quiet way some of them looked at the stars for a moment longer than before continuing their work. For the rest of us, though, something had shifted permanently. Concord threat assessments were updated, diplomatic protocols involving human colonies were reviewed, and in several cases, quietly rewritten with a new degree of caution. Other species began treating human defense forces with a respect that had not existed before, a respect built equally from gratitude and a kind of careful wariness. I noticed it most clearly in how commanders spoke about human units afterward. There was a new phrase that spread quickly through Concord ranks in the months that followed. Do not mistake their patience for their limit. I have served alongside many species since that day, and I have seen many demonstrations of strength, skill, and courage. But nothing has stayed with me the way Haven Ridge did, because it taught me something I still think about often. Strength that is always on display is easy to understand and, in a strange way, easy to dismiss. It becomes expected, even ordinary. But strength that is quietly held back, offered gently day after day, only to reveal itself fully when it is truly needed. That is the kind of strength that changes how you see an entire species forever. Humans did not stop being gentle after that day. If anything, I think their gentleness meant more to me afterward, because I finally understood what it cost them to maintain it, and what waited quietly beneath it when it was no longer enough. They chose kindness, every day, not because they lacked any other option, but because kindness was the harder, better choice, and they were capable of making it again and again, even after everything they had seen and done. That is why, decades later, when young officers ask me what a Deathworlder truly is, I do not describe battles or tactics or casualty reports. I tell them about Daniel Reyes, standing quietly by a row of recovery pods, grieving a colleague he barely knew, still finding a tired smile for a friend from another world. I tell them about a species that spent most of its history among us being endlessly, deliberately patient, until the one day it mattered most, when patience gave way to something the entire galaxy would remember. We call it the day Deathworlders stopped playing nice. But I have come to think of it differently. I think of it as the day we finally understood how much nice they had been playing, all along, and how grateful we should have been for every quiet, ordinary day before it.